Hello, welcome everyone to the 100&Change webinar series, Thinking Big and Communicating Clearly. My name is Kristen Molyneaux and I'm the Senior Program Officer for 100&Change. We're excited to have everyone on the line for what is our 8th or 9th webinar now in our series. And this one is focused on key learnings from 100&Change. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. First of all, this webinar will be recorded, and a link to the webinar and all relevant materials and a transcription will be sent out to all attendees within the next few days. Secondly, if you look to the panel on your left, you will see that there is a link for closed captioning. If you would like to have access to closed captioning during the presentation, simply click on that link and follow any directions that you may receive. Next, during the course of the webinar, you may type in questions or Q&A, any questions that you have for the presenters into the text messaging box to the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I will be monitoring the questions and will pose those questions to our presenters towards the end of the presentation. We will try and get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. And finally, this is the first time that MacArthur is running such a webinar series, and we would love to get your feedback. At the end of the webinar, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. We would love for you to take a couple of moments to give us some feedback so that we can continue to improve on this webinar series. With all of that housekeeping covered, we're going to jump into the content of the webinar. So as part of our 100&Change competition, we enlisted the support of a learning partner, Apt Associates, who has worked alongside MacArthur over the course of the first round of the competition. This learning partner has conducted interviews and surveys across a wide range of 100&Change stakeholders, including applicants, judges, 100&Change staff, semifinalists, and finalists for our inaugural competition. Today, Jessie Gerteis, our Senior Associate from Apt Associates, will discuss some of the high-level findings from our recently published evaluation report. And we're putting the link to that report in the Q&A box as well so that people can link to it if they're interested. She will later be joined by Cecilia, Conrad, our Managing Director for 100&Change, to have a conversation on how these learnings will be translated into actionable changes for the next round of 100&Change. Jessie, I go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen. So as Kristen mentioned, the MacArthur Foundation hired Apt Associates. We're a research and consulting firm to conduct an evaluation of the application and selection processes for 100&Change and really to bring an objective perspective to the evaluation. And as I think Kristen mentioned as well, the findings that I'm going to present today are really part of a larger set of evaluation findings that are included in our evaluation report, which is going to be shared with you all. And today I'm really going to focus on findings that are most relevant for general applicants, including how well different types of applicants did in the competition, feedback about the initial application process, and overall benefits and harms of applying that we got from applicants. And I'm not going to focus on findings related to the later stages of the competition or to the Foundation's outreach efforts. And the findings that I'm going to discuss today primarily draw upon a quantitative analysis of the registration data that we did, a web-based survey with applicants who scored in the top 200, and interviews and focus groups with a variety of 100&Change applicants, including those top 200 applicants, semifinalists, and finalists. So to start, I'll give a little context to the findings with some information about who applied to the competition and how well these different types of applicants performed. In all, the MacArthur Foundation received 1,904 complete applications, and of these, 801 made it through administrative review and went on to be scored by the judges. We aggregated the 32 different reported project topic areas that were received into these 8 categories that are included in the chart that's shown here. As you can see, health and well-being, environment, and social welfare were the most common topics among the scored applicants. And these were also the 3 topic areas that performed the best overall in the competition. Health had the largest proportion of scored applications that made it into the top 200, and that was followed by environment and social welfare. US-based organizations were much more likely to apply to 100&Change competition than organizations based in other countries. However, among the applications scored by judges, non-US-based organizations were equally likely to be scored in the top 200 as US-based organizations. So that is to say, basically, they did equally well in the competition overall. Although it should be noted that all 8 of the groups selected as semifinalists were US-based organizations. Nearly half of applications scored by judges proposed work that would have a global reach, and that may or may not have included the US. More than a third proposed a project that would be located in the US only, and 15% proposed doing work exclusively outside of the US. And then this 5% suggested doing work both inside and outside the United States. Where a proposed project would take place was related to how well an application did in the competition. About a third of scored applications proposed projects with either a global reach or work outside the US were scored in the top 200, compared to 15% of those planning US-only work. In the end, 2 of the semifinalists and none of the 4 finalists proposed work that would take place in the US only. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Oh well. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to move on to feedback from the applicants. When asked about the difficulty of completing the initial 100&Change application, top 200 applicants were most likely to report that it was somewhat more difficult than those for other funding opportunities. However, half of survey respondents reported that it was either about the same or somewhat easier. Overall, applicants told us that the application requirements were challenging, but they were reasonable, and that the application was well structured and easy to follow. So sorry, I was missing a slide there that showed that. When we asked them about the most challenging aspects of the 100&Change application, we heard that it was hard for applicants to fit their complex ideas into the word limits that were required in the application. And this was especially true because they were trying to explain their work to people from outside their field. However, a number of applicants told us that while those word limits were challenging, they were also a good thing because they forced their team to be clear and concise in their writing. Applicants also told us that it was difficult and time-consuming for them to negotiate full MOUs with their partners in the limited amount of time they had to complete their application. Some groups found it difficult to develop the videos, and this was because it required some special skills and something they really just weren't used to doing for grant applications. This was less of a concern for universities and nonprofit organizations, however, because they have communications and marketing teams that could really help with this activity. And a number of groups told us it was difficult to budget for a project of $100 million because it was really outside of their practical experience. And finally, applicants suggested a number of ways that the application website could be improved. This included making it possible to print out what had been entered already, making it easier to work on the application offline, allowing materials such as figures and pictures to be uploaded into the application, and providing a confirmation notice when applications were successfully submitted. Applicants found the judges' comments that they received to be helpful. This was particularly true for identifying where their proposal needs strengthening or greater clarity, and that they could then use that feedback to help revise their proposal for other applications. The applicants did provide some feedback about the judging process, and this included concerns that the judges didn't have the right expertise to accurately assess their projects. Some applicants wanted to be able to respond to the judges' comments and felt that they could quickly clear up a misunderstanding if they could have just responded. There were a few people that had concerns that judges brought their own biases into the process, or that they didn't fully follow the competition guidance that was laid out by the foundation. And some of the applicants reported having difficulty interpreting their scores, or they had concerns about the impact of one particularly negative judge's score. 95% of judges who participated in the survey said that they would be willing to serve as a judge again in the future, indicating a really high level of satisfaction on their end in terms of their participation. However, the judges also had some suggestions for improving the process from their own perspective. This included more pre-screening to remove poor quality applications before the judges reviewed the applications, more training for the judges on using the scoring rubric and the scoring traits, and examples of high-quality proposals that they could use for benchmarking purposes. And some judges also suggested that they wanted their own expertise to be matched to the proposals that they reviewed. As part of the evaluation, we also looked at the cost-benefit of participation for applicants. And you'll see here that 60% of respondents to the survey reported that the benefits of participating in 100&Change outweighed the costs. Applicants reported experiencing a number of benefits to their participation in the competition, and this included advancing their organizational planning and development, deepening existing partnerships or developing new partnerships, learning about other organizations that could potentially lead to future collaborations, increasing the publicity and awareness of their organization or of the work that they do, and receiving additional interest from current or new funders. The groups that were named as the top 200 mainly saw this as an honor that they could use for their own promotional purposes or just to give a boost to their staff who had worked really hard on the application. But some groups thought that the designation was too big of a group to be very meaningful or useful for them. The majority of top 200 applicants reported in a survey that they had expended somewhat more or much more resources when preparing for the initial application than they had typically expended on a grant application. This was mainly because of the time that they put in conceptualizing such a large project and editing the sections for word count and negotiating the MOUs. However, other than the time and expense that they put in, 94% of the top 200 applicants in the survey said that there was no negative impacts of their applying. In interviews, some people told us that there were some opportunity costs in terms of other things they couldn't apply to when they were busy on this application, and the impact of preparing the application had on their staff in terms of people feeling overworked and exhausted during the application period. But these issues were much more of a concern for the semifinalists and finalists because they had longer involvement in the competition and the later stages were more intense. However, I should just note here that all of the semifinalists and finalists reported that the benefits of their participation outweighed the costs. There's that slide. All right. Half of respondents to the survey reported that their organization would definitely apply for the next round, and another 44% said that they would consider applying again. So that's pretty considerable. And overall, competition applicants really reported to us that they were excited and inspired by the 100&Change competition, and they wanted to be a part of it. And this was even though they recognized that winning that $100 million was really a long shot for them. People told us they found the competition's openness to projects in any field and in any topic area to be really refreshing, and that the competition allowed their organization to be creative and to propose their own best ideas. And I've included a couple of quotes here that really exemplify this sentiment. Okay, so that was all of the slides about the evaluation that I was going to share, and I think now we're going to move into a discussion with Cecilia Conrad to discuss about how these learnings from the evaluation and elsewhere are going to be applied by the Foundation to improve the next round of 100&Change. So Cecilia, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi.
Jessie, before
Yeah.
you guys get started, Jessie, there's one quick question that came in that I think would just be helpful for framing, just helpful to answer quickly. Somebody asked, how many judges were there in total, and how many did you interview and survey?
So I don't remember exactly how many judges there were, Cecilia. I think it was like 450.
Yeah, 450.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry, 413. 413.
And the judges survey actually wasn't conducted by us. It was conducted by Common Pool, who ran the competition piece, the website. So I looked at the feedback and metrics from them and analyzed the findings. I can find the actual number. It was a small percentage who participated in the survey, so that's that should be taken into consideration. Thinking about that 95. And obviously, people who participate are generally either the ones that are the happiest or the least happy. So I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can look for it and see if I can find it.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Yeah. So Cecilia, I guess the first question is, did you feel that the criteria, and I think by criteria we mean scoring traits in the rubric that was used in the first round of 100&Change was the right criteria that was used, and will you use the same criteria in the next round?
Yes, I think in general, the criteria were the right criteria. I'll say that one of the discussions we had internally and with our board had to do with the first criteria, meaningful, which turned out not to be really a great discriminator among projects. And also, we may not have communicated well enough to the judges that meaningful wasn't just about the number of people who might be impacted, that it could also involve having a deep impact on a small group of people. So we are replacing meaningful with impactful, which is closely related, but also spelling out a bit what impactful might include in designing the rubric. And we're in the process of designing that now. We've renamed verifiable to mean evidence-based, which is really what we meant all along. And so the actual guidance is unchanged. We have feasible, we've retained, which is the question of whether or not it's actually feasible to implement the solution. So evidence-based is there evidence that the solution will work, and feasible is it possible to really do it. And then finally, durable, which I think is really one of the distinguishing features of 100&Change, that we want there to be a plan for how the impact, the solution will be sustained after the $100 million grant is expended. Okay, I understand people can't hear me. I'm going to try a different side of the room. Okay, I'll try and quickly just repeat what I said. The criteria are going to be very similar in this next round. We're replacing meaningful with impactful, and we're trying to give more guidance that impactful can mean that it may impact a small group of people in a very deep way, as opposed to being about impacting lots and lots of people. We are renaming verifiable to evidence-based for just clarity, that we're looking for projects that have some evidence they will work. Feasible is the idea, it stays as the same. It's the idea that the project can actually be implemented. And we're retaining durable, which was really one of the distinctive features of 100&Change. We're looking for a plan to sustain impact beyond the $100 million grant.
Great.
I hope people can hear me this time. Can everyone hear me?
Looks like it's a mixed bag.
It's still the same. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's about as good as we're going to be able to get, so we're just going to have to talk very loudly on our side.
I will shout some more.
So Cecilia, another pain point that people brought up was the MOUs, that some organizations had a really hard time doing those MOUs. Do you plan to keep that requirement, and if so, what is your thinking behind that?
Yes, we actually listened very carefully to that feedback, but decided that we would keep the MOU, partly because we also heard from many organizations that it was an important moment for them to really talk with their partners and make sure that they were on the same page, that they had the same expectations about how the project would work. It's a critical part of the application because many of the best projects were collaborations, and you wanted to make sure that the collaborations were ones that could likely be effective.
Great. And then what about the video requirement? We heard from some groups that that was a challenge as well. Can you speak to a little bit about why you have included the video requirement for the application, and if that's going to be included in the next round as well?
Yes, we've thought quite a bit about the video requirement given that feedback. And we had emphasized early on that we were not looking for high production quality, that we were looking for something that could be done with an iPhone. We've decided to retain it because the judges felt that they were really helpful, that many teams were actually most effective in explaining their project on their video, more so than they were in some of the written text. And so we are keeping it, but we are building in some more guidance to teams and some tips on the videos. We now have some samples that we can show you just to reassure people that we really are not looking for high production value, that a video can be effective that was taken with an iPhone and a single person.
Great. So we talked about that the judges, many of the judges enjoyed the process, but they also felt that more screening would have been useful to weed out poor quality proposals. Do you have plans for handling that for the next round of 100&Change?
Yes, we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, we will have a self-audit tool for potential applicants to do a self-assessment as to whether their project is at the right stage for 100&Change. We hope that this will be helpful to the many examples of applicants who were disqualified through the administrative review. We'd like to see that be a smaller percentage. In addition to that, we are also going to be introducing peer-to-peer review. Let me say a little bit about what that's about. It's been done in some other competitions recently. It's an initial stage review after the administrative review process, where applicants will be asked to review each other's proposal using the rubric that we have developed, the same rubric that the evaluation panel will be used. Each applicant will be asked to review, I believe it's 5 proposals of other organizations who are in a similar domain, similar kinds of area of work. So if you are in healthcare delivery, you'd be asked to review other proposals in healthcare delivery and so on. What has been learned in other competitions is that this process is actually really a great opportunity for organizations to find out about other work in their field. It also has given organizations a stronger sense of what the rubric is about and a stronger understanding of the type of what the competitive landscape looks like in terms of the competition. So we're going to do this as a first level screen, and then a defined group will emerge from peer review to go to the evaluation panel.
Great. We also talked about how some organizations in the top 200 felt that it was an honor to be named in the as the top 200, while others thought that the designation was too large of a group to be very meaningful for them. Are there going to be any changes around that top designation in the next round?
Yes. We are re-examining the levels of recognition. I think I saw an earlier question here about different forms of recognition that we should take a look at that question in a moment. One of the first things we'll do is that in this first round, and this is, as many of you know, this was our first time, we were learning, we announced the top 200 after we had already announced the semifinalists, which kind of took the limelight off the top 200. This time around, we will be making a first-round recognition ahead of announcing any finalist in the competition. And there will be a period of time where that group will be kind of in the limelight. We also will be creating a separate database of just the recognized applications from 100&Change, the top group. And so that will be another kind of form of recognition for them. And we'll be using that much more actively to attract other donors. I will say that we have been excited with what we've heard so far from teams who are in the top 200 about the designation and the judges' feedback, giving them opportunities to have meetings with funders that they couldn't have before. And we've also heard of some funding that has flowed to that group. So we're going to listen carefully to that feedback and try to create some different levels of recognition that are of value to applicants.
Great. So those are all the questions that I have. Kristen, I know there's a lot of questions that have come through. Do you want to read some of those off?
Sure. Yeah, we're getting a lot of questions, so people continue to send those questions in via the instant message box on the left-hand corner of your screen. I will start out with, I think, probably what some people think is the most pressing question, which is, can we share an update on a timeline for the next round of applications, or when we will be sharing information about that timeline?
We will make an official announcement about the timeline in sometime late January, early February, but I can share with you that the applications will be due towards the end of June.
And that kind of flows into a second question, which is whether or not we will be extending the timeline for MOUs to be executed, as that seems to be a main challenge for the competition.
As I mentioned before, we do plan to require MOUs as part of the competition, and they would be due along with the rest of the application under our current plans.
So you're getting warning now that you should maybe be thinking about your MOUs if you're thinking about applying in the next round. So here's an interesting question, and you talked a little bit about this just a few moments ago, is would it be possible to be even more public with the different decision levels? So, for example, it was an honor to be one of the 801 projects to reach the level of full evaluation. Could this be made more public next time? I do think it would be very helpful to list that honor in live presentations and other applications.
And I think that's a very interesting idea. We will talk about that internally. As I mentioned earlier, we are in the process of thinking about what the levels of recognition should be, and I'm certainly going to take that one under consideration.
Did top proposals win more #1 rankings, or did they win because of a steady, solid support from almost everyone?
Well, as you recall, in the judging process, there was the judges scored according to all of the criteria, and those judges' scores were normalized. There's a normalization procedure that was made public in order to make sure that if you got a particularly hard judge, that it didn't hurt you relative to someone who got an easy judge. And our boards looked at the top scoring group from the judges. So I can't say that there was #1 rankings or 2 rankings. They looked at the top scoring group, they read the judges' comments, they looked at the scores, and they made their selections based on that information.
And I think to follow on to that is a separate question around how robust the screening process is with respect to the numerical scheme used for judging. Can you talk a little bit about the normalization process of the judges' scores?
I'm not sure I completely understand what the question is asking. Beyond the normalization procedure is actually still available on the competition website if you want to look at that. It basically is very similar to statistical process as you might see when you grade on a curve. It's taking the judges and looking at their scores relative to the other scores of the same application and doing an assessment, and then upping scores of judges who tend to be hard scorers and lowering scores of judges who tend to be high scorers. That's just a very generic kind of description of it.
Perfect, thank you. Somebody is asking a little bit more about the peer-to-peer review process and whether or not that is going to be mandatory for all applicants.
Yes, it will be mandatory for all applicants.
All right. How important, so this is kind of following on to the question around the MOU that you brought up. How important is partnership with another organization? Are you likely to not fund projects that are in the same thematic area as the winner? And are you likely to not fund projects that are in the same thematic area as the winners last time? So 2 questions.
Okay, so on the first question, we don't have a bias in favor or against collaboration, but I will observe that if you look at the top scoring applications from the first version of 100&Change, there was a fairly high proportion that involved collaborations. I don't have that specific number on me, but it was a pattern that we observed. I think it's important for organizations to do a little assessment of where they might not have the experience or background in a particular aspect of the problem they're trying to solve, and think about bringing on a partner that does. I think that just is going to strengthen the feasibility assessment of a project.
And what about our likelihood to fund projects that are in the same thematic area as the winner last time?
I don't think there's any real way to assess whether that's going to happen or not. There's certainly no bias against it, but also no bias for it.
All right, and this is the last question that I have, so if people have additional questions, you should feel free to send them in. The last question that I have at the moment, anyway, is since 100&Change is now well established, could MacFound reach out to other potential funders who might have funding for the runners-up?
Yes, and in fact, one of the things that we are actively doing is trying to bring funders on earlier than we have in the past to engage them along the way in our process. We had, in the first round, included some as members of the judging panel, and we will do that again. We really recognize that this exercise is a great opportunity to uncover really terrific projects and more than we can fund with our $100 million grant. And so we have gotten a lot of interest from other funders, and we're actively seeking to bring them on board.
Excellent. So for the peer-to-peer review process, how will you manage projects that have a unique thematic area?
Well, we'll be defining the thematic areas fairly broadly. So I think we're looking at different categorization schemes right now, but I'll just use as an example the Sustainable Development Goals. There are other kinds of schemes, and so you likely will fall under one of those broad categories. It is not an attempt to exactly match the areas of work. It's under a broad category of work. We're also looking at whether there will also be a geographic intersection.
Great. Interesting question here, and we got this a lot during the first round of 100&Change, is how innovative should the proposal be versus how tried and tested and proposed to be brought to scale?
I'm glad you asked this question because I really want to emphasize that the boldness of 100&Change lies in the fact that it's a single grant for $100 million and that we're letting the organizations tell us how they want to use the money. It is not looking for innovation per se, it is looking for evidence-based initiatives. Now, those may have innovative elements to them, but we are looking for things that have persuasive evidence that they can work.
Will there also be winners of smaller $10 to $15 million grants like last year?
I would say at this point the answer is no. That is what I have understood from the board of directors. We did that the first time in part because we were in a learning pattern, and I think that next time around we'll be making a stronger effort to bring on other funders early, with the hopes that there'll be funding for finalists beyond our $100 million grant, but that funding comes from other funders.
Additional questions. Do you know the breakdown for the top 200 regarding traditional businesses, social enterprises, hybrids, universities, and nonprofits, etc.? That actually might be a question for Jessie too. I'm not sure if you have that off the top of your head.
Yeah, we didn't do that exact breakdown, but I think, you know, overall, the vast majority of the applicants were NGOs and universities. Cecilia, you might have this stuff better in your memory, but I know that, you know, there were definitely some for-profit organizations and hybrids, but that was a much smaller number.
I have to admit that I agree with your assessment of the proportions, universities and NGOs, very small number of for-profits. I do think that it is in one of the blog posts, and we can maybe post it and give you that link, because I believe there's a blog post where I broke that data down.
And I think we are asking it too a little bit differently in the next round of 100&Change to really capture some of those breakdowns as well. How can an organization get the opportunity available from 100&Change if it's so new and outside the box that though it's been at work for 36 years, it is small and underfunded and it has not really received the attention that maybe it should receive for the work it's doing?
I think if this organization has evidence that what they are doing, that the solution that they are implementing is working, then 100&Change is a great opportunity to try and bring more attention to its work.
And the only other question that I have right now is again associated with kind of the pipeline of proposals. So 800 proposals equal about $80 billion in the pipeline that are good ideas for changing the world. So what is your thinking around turning that challenge process into a catalyst for convening other investors?
Yes, we are looking at ways to do that, and so I would advise you to stay tuned for what we have to say when we make our official announcements in early winter 2019. I will say that we are in the process of trying to get some rough estimates of what we think we've catalyzed in the first round of 100&Change. And we have estimates that run from being really certain that we've doubled the investment to possibly tripling if we add some funds that have flowed to organizations that we're not 100% sure we can claim credit for. So we're excited about that, and we would certainly like to do something like that again. And I'll add that I think, you know, that we did sort of a little bit after the fact, and I think by engaging funders earlier, there will be more opportunity.
So we don't have any additional questions in the queue at the moment.
Okay. I have an add-on to the question about MOUs, which has come from our chief counsel here, and that is that one of the things that's important to know about why we need these MOUs is that in the end, we're going to make a grant to a lead organization, to a single entity. We're not going to make a grant and then split it up among the partners and so on. So we need to know that that entity exercises control over the funds. And so the MOU is to get an agreement about who will be the legal entity and how that control will be exercised.
So I have a question, Cecilia, which is just what are you most looking forward to in the next round of 100&Change?
I am looking forward to reading about all the various ways that people are trying to make the world a better place and to improve it. I can't tell you how uplifting it is to read those applications and get inspired by the good work that many of you are out there doing. So I'm looking forward to that most. I will also just take this moment. I know that there were some really practical suggestions people had, and you'll be happy to know that there will be a submit button for the next round of 100&Change, and that you will be able to print out your application from 100&Change. So we are trying to make those improvements that you have suggested in your feedback.
So another question has come in. Are you looking for any funding partners who may have specific sectors of influence, such as international or fragile states?
Yes. If you happen to be a funding partner who is interested in working with us, please contact us.
Cecilia, this is Jessie. I have another question for you, just in terms of a lot of the feedback that we heard, that people had concerns or questions about the foundation having preferences, even though it was an open competition, that there might be preferences for different types of work, either that was in line with other types of grants that the foundation gives or is different than other types of grants. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I want to emphasize again that this is an open competition, that we did not begin it with any notions of being interested in particular areas or excluding particular areas. I know in the first competition, I was told at some events that people assumed it was going to be about climate and conservation because the videos had mountains. The video might have a mountain again, but I assure you we're not focused on climate or conservation. On the other hand, we're not opposed to that as a topic. The finalists this time were kind of eclectic a bit in the work they were doing, although someone pointed out that they all had a focus on children. That wasn't a bias that we went in. It just emerged perhaps as some of the more compelling projects. So I think what I'm trying to say is this is truly an open competition. I'm excited to see what emerges in this next round at the top, and I wouldn't expect that there are any clues in the first group about what that might be.
Are there any additional questions from our audience? If not, we might go ahead and close the webinar a little bit early. Cecilia has a comment.
Well, I just wanted to say that I noticed that there are a number of judges in the audience, and if you are indeed interested in serving on the evaluation panel again, please feel free to send me an email because I will begin to start constituting that soon. So I think that was the other thing.
Excellent. Well, if there are no other questions, I think we will go ahead and log out a little bit early. Just to let you know that we will be doing our next webinar, Defining Charitable Purpose, on Wednesday, January 23rd at 10 o'clock Central. Please remember that there's a survey after this webinar ends that will pop up, and so we'll be asking everybody to just fill that out quickly. And also we'll be sending out a link to all of the materials, including a link to the evaluation which has been put online, as well as the PowerPoints and the video of this webinar. We thank everybody so much for joining us, and we look forward to reading all of your fabulous proposals sometime next year after we announce the next 100&Change competition. Many thanks, everyone.